It should have been the perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for a whole 3 weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into my neighborhood right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when I struck out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline and I wasn't invited, but my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had stuff like enemies too. But he knew of a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Of all of us in this room, we can probably admit that we have enemies. Whether it's a person, an idea, a political party, a group of people, there's always one thing in common, and it's difference. Our differences are important, and they make us who we are. Instead of fighting our differences, we should accept them. Enemy pie is a great example of accepting our differences and making friends with our enemies. While you may not like someone, you don't have to be their enemy. And you don't even have to be their friend. But looking through their lens makes all the difference in coexisting with them. I present to you Enemy Pie by Derek Munson. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy pie, he said, satisfied. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind turning and working. What kinds of things, disgusting things, would I put in an enemy pie? This could be great summer after all. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really good. As far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. When I went to ask Dad what was wrong, enemy pie should not smell this good. But Dad, he was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, would your enemy really eat it? He said. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang and Dad pulled the enemy pie out. It looked like a plain old pie. In fact, it looked good enough to eat. What exactly did it do to enemies? He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my part of the job. In order for it to work, you need to spend a whole day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to them. It's not going to be easy, but that is the only way enemy pie can work. Are you sure you still want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. I rode my bike over to Jeremy's house and knocked on the door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed a bit surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. Can you play? I said. He looked confused. I'll go ask my mom, he said, and came back with his shoes in his hand. We rode bikes for a while and played on his trampoline. Jeremy's mom even made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course, I couldn't tell Dad that because since he had worked so hard to make this enemy pie, Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win a game just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw and came right back to him. I threw it and went over our house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my tree house. No, my tree house was my tree house. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, she couldn't come in. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him in. And if Jeremy wanted in, can we go in the tree house? I knew he was going to ask that. But Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. And enemies were not allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me how to throw a boomerang. And he did let me play on his trampoline. And he did have me over for lunch. He wasn't being a very good enemy. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. Dad made us macaroni and cheese. My favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut it into 8 thick slices. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. "Wow," Jeremy said, looking at the pie. It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat the enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. "Jeremy, don't eat the pie. It's like a bad thing or poisonous or something." Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth, and he crumpled his eyebrows. He looked at me funny. "If it's so bad," Jeremy asked, "then why is your dad already eaten half of it?" I turned to look at my dad, and sure enough, there was Dad eating the pie. "Good stuff," he mumbled through a mouthful. Seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny little taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Enemy pie rode his bike. Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, but I don't think I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy.